welcome back to this series of videos about Total.js UI. In the previous video, we were talking about the paths, how to understand the role and importance of paths in the library in general. And in this video, I would like to come back to something I promised I would cover in a certain video. It was the UI bind. So what we are going to cover here is what is data binding and how is it important in the front-end development, and also what is the UI bind element, what are the possible attributes of that UI bind element, the binding comments, and also some example of binding comments. If you are watching my videos without subscribing, please make a pause and click on the subscribe button so that the next time I will publish my videos, you will be the first person to be notified. The data binding concept is something very important, and it is everywhere in the front-end development. Whether you are using Angular, React, or Vue.js, the concept of data binding is very important, and I think this is the backbone of the front-end development, because this is what makes the UI very dynamic, very interactive. So what is data binding specifically? Data binding is what connects your UI elements to the data models. Everything you have as data, you can use the data binding concept to bind it to the UI elements, so that whenever there is some change in the UI, also you can have that data automatically in the data models. I'm going to make some notes on data binding. Binding connects your UI elements to the data models, and anytime, yes, this is what is data binding. Now, what is the UI bind elements? First of all, this is a custom element within Total.js UI library. The custom elements is something like the bridge choose. Okay, this is the custom bridge that we choose in the Total.js to bridge between the data and the UI elements. So I'm going to make it easy to understand like that. This is just a bridge between the UI elements and the data models. Understand by data models whatever you have in the JavaScript. So how do you learn about the UI bind? You can go to the documentation, have it here. I don't know if it is big enough so that you can see. You can scroll and see that you have some UI bind. This is what I said. It's a custom element here. If you don't know how to create a custom element, it is possible. The web API of JavaScript allows you to create custom elements. You can simply type, if you want to know about the topic, you can simply type on the Google search bar HTML custom elements. Okay, you will have some informations about how to create your own custom elements and assign some attributes, and you can even make some implementation, extend an existing element. Okay, feel free to type and learn about the topic. By default, the UI band element has a relative inline block positioning. Like not only there is a UI bind element, also there will be a CSS in the library to handle the positioning of the UI element. What does it mean? Relative inline block positioning is very simple to understand. It means that wherever you will put your UI bind element, the binding effect will happen in that position relatively to where you have put the UI bind element. Possible element attributes. If you get back to the documentations, you can extend it like that and scroll down until you see the element, the attributes. I'm not going to cover all of them. I'm going to simply talk about the path, the config, and the element attributes. The parent and child element, I will cover them in the future when I will talk about the advanced uses of these elements. The first and the most important one is the path attribute. Basically, the path here is going to say where the data actually is. That's why you need the path. Like here, I have path, which is title. It means that this is a address of where the title actually is. If I go back to here, let me remove this first because I'm not actually talking about the element attribute. Okay, the path attribute is where you specify the link or the address to where to your data in the data model, and this is the role of the path element. And next is the config. The config is going to hold the comments. Like if you want to bind the data, what action you want to make when the data is changing, because you want a UI which is very interactive, so you need to watch the changes that happen in your data model, and whenever there is some change in the data model, you need to execute some kind of comment. Where you specify that comments, it is exactly in the config attribute, and the config attribute is very important. Sometimes you don't need the path, but you will always need the config one, because it is useless to have a UI bind element if you don't have a config that specify what comment to execute whenever there is some change in the UI. So let's get back here and I will show you some examples. If you drop down here, it is saying that the list of the commands are below here. If you scroll down, you'll see the list of commands. There are lots of predefined commands that you can use to make your UI bind react to the changes of your path. Let's take an example. If for example I make a simple function, okay, a set interval, let me see, 500 milliseconds, and simply I'm going to change the title dynamically so that we can watch how the command is acting. Let me get back here to see what is actually happening here. As you can see, it is simply changing like that. Okay, it means simply that whenever there is some change in the data model here, there will be a reaction in the UI bind element here. But what does it mean again? Because we have a command here. The command in this context is text. Text command is what displays a text simply within the UI bind tag. If we simply inspect, okay, let me simply comment it out like that and get back here to show you how it works internally. You simply inspect, okay, and then pick this selector, inspector, and you click here. Okay, the command, the text command is going to simply assign the value inside the UI bind. That's simply how it works. But before I get back to how the commands works, let's proceed with the last attribute. Last attribute I wanted to present here is the element attribute. The element attribute specifies a selector of another HTML element where you want the data to be binded. It is very simple. Let's say we have the UI bind here, and by default has a relative positioning. So now you want, for example, that whenever there is some change in the path, the value will be assigned not in that UI bind element but another element. That is why you can specify another element attribute like that, another attribute called element, and you specify a reference to the other element where you want the data to be binded. This is very simple. You can simply put, for example, like paragraph, okay, and I'm going to create that element paragraph, okay, auto completion, and this is a div. For now, unless you inspect, you can't see the difference. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to add a style with a color red. Now you can see that the title is not displayed within here, but instead it is displayed in that element. How do you know it? You can simply inspect again. This is one of the reflex of front-end developers. You can see that the UI bind element is here, but the value is binded to a different element here. This is what I wanted to talk about, the attributes. So first attribute was path, and the second attribute was config, and the last attribute was element, which is something optional. Okay, this is what I forgot to tell you, it is optional. Okay, now let's talk about commands. Okay, if you look back here, we said that today we have the path attribute, which is indicating where the data is, and whenever there is some change in the data, we specify in config a command which will going to be executed. How does it mean? It means that that command is a function, because command is more like an action. If you have an action function, you can specify and say how whenever there is some change in the path, execute that command with the value in the data model. Okay, it is very simple like that. The command is a function that will be executed on the new value when data changes. If you get back to documentation, you go to common content, scroll down, you will see types of common expressions. Okay, you can express a command like that. There are many ways you can execute a command. I'm not going to go deep in those things, but basically you can specify command like that. Imagine that I simply want to specify a text, but I want to make some changes in the value before I render the text. I can simply put a value like that, or I can remove it. As you can see, I could simply put the command without specifying anything, and it's going to work. If I want, I can put this like a middleware. I don't know how I will call it. This is just a middleware function that is going to execute on the value of the path to uppercase, which is going to put all the value to uppercase. This puts all the value to uppercase. I could simply access not only the value but also the HTML element, so on and so forth, like that, this way. First parameter is the value, the second parameter is the path, and the last is the element. And then I can make an array function like that to specify what I actually want to do. Like I could simply print the path, okay, and the path is nothing but title, because this is what I specified here. Or I could also put element like that, display the element, which is going to be an object like that. Okay, but what if I say element.html? Because I know this is simply not going to display anything, but I know in the, let's see if there is not an error. It simply means that if, for example, I had some span here, it's going to simply display the HTML between inside of it. Or maybe I can do lots of other things, or I could simply make a different way of displaying the command, like this way, a simple array function like that. The slug is part of the Total.js UI prototype, means some custom functions that extends the native functionalities of JavaScript. Okay, if I type value.slug like that, it is going to display a slug. Or another way to display it is simply like that. I don't know, since it is not a value, I don't know, but I can say I. What is the slug of I? Please let me remove that element because it is injecting it there, because I is a number, but I could simply do it like that, and I is going to be 0. But what if I say in this case is going to display true? This is going to display false. One another thing is simply put a function. This is a reference to another function. Like here I can have and simply here, instead of putting all of this implementation, I replace it with display. So for now, nothing happens here. It's because display is not returning anything. If I can make return hi, and in this case, whatever I put in this path, it is going to output I. But I can decide to output the value 2 and it still works. I can change the path here again to title, and bam, we have our title back to the display. Okay, and you can make some console.log or things like element on the go, and you will see it is going to display a jQuery instance of that. I will explain it later because jQuery is loaded by default in the UI library, because I haven't imported jQuery here explicitly, but we have it inside of our UI library. I'm going to come back on that later. But this kind of command is predefined, like the text. Put the command name, which is text in this case, and then you put a function to handle the value before the display. It is simply how it works. So basically how it works is, how does it work? You put in the config the name of your command. Okay, the command is able to take a value by default from the path and execute with that. But in case you need to make some transformation on that value before display, before you give it to the command, what you need is simply put a display, put a array function, whatever, to handle that function before handle the data and make some transformation on the value before you give it back to the config, to your command. So now let's see some predefined commands. The first command I would like to show you is the show hide command. They are different, but basically they work the same. If I scroll down here to see the list of commands, scroll down again, you will see show somewhat. The show command is going to show whatever is inside of the UI, the section of the UI, in a certain condition. If the path is changing. So let us see an example. I'm going to get rid of that element attribute so that we get back to a normal way of using the UI bind, and that is simply specifying the UI bind element like that, and inside of the element you wrap it with whatever you want. It can be a UL, okay, the UL, and you have some LEs elements, which is going to be Total.js UI, and then almost Angular. This is just a simple list of front-end frameworks, and finally you will have Vue.js. I'm talking about Next.js or something like this because they are all related to React, I think. Okay, let me know in the comment if I'm wrong. Now if you get back here, you have the display. How we test it, we can simply get back here, get rid of that command which is text, and put show, and then we put by default value. Alright, let's come here and see we have the list of the elements which is correctly displaying, not a problem. So but whenever there is nothing here, okay, like if I remove this, it is not showing, okay, until there is some data, like this is just simply 1 and it is showing. But if you get back here, you can put some comments, like if you want the value to obey, to follow some certain condition, like if the value is equal to 1, then it is showing, and if you want it to be 3, it is not going to show again. See, the show hide, they work the same. Could simply put the hide command like this. If you want to know where the hide command is, scroll here, scroll up and see hide. Okay, this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video where I will go deep with the command. We have so many commands here that I did not have time to cover. I don't want the video to be so long. I will make another video. The part 2 of the data binding concept will be about the commands and also how to implement some example, some real life project with the data binding concept. And one of the most important command I will be explaining, I'll show you how to list things and how to design and render some kind of templating in the UI. And I will also show you the tag one, the required, the refresh, and so many, and the HTML, not forgetting the HTML command too, the init one and the exec. Okay, I will show you how you can combine them to make some dynamic UI elements and some dynamic interfaces. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.